A woman survives an assault in the New Mexico desert.
What's going on out there?
I ran into a girl. She's just wearing her underwear and a pair of socks.
They found a male, and he was unresponsive.
She had stabbed a man who was trying to rape her.
The crime scene contains clues of something even more disturbing and more than one suspect.
They noticed that there was a man that kept peering up over the rocks and looking down.
The weapon was a so-called ceremonial dagger.
It looked like it had some Egyptian markings, more of a fantasy thing.
There is what appears to be almost overkill. What the hell is going on here?
And when investigators uncover the truth, it leads them to a killer driven by dark obsessions.
She had 2 different social media accounts. One of those referenced satanic worship.
She just became all consumed and obsessed with the occult.
The closer I got, the more hysterical she was panicking about something.
I don't care how tough and crusty of an investigator you are. That's chilling to the bone.
It's March 22nd, 2010, in the foothills outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. Spring is in the air, and hikers are enjoying one of the most popular locations in the area, the Copper Trailhead.
Albuquerque is this amazing desert oasis.
In this particular location, you have a lot of people that get off work, and part of their daily routine is to go and exercise, to just go to get away and find a little peace and solitude.
But a little before 6 p.m., the serenity is shattered by a disturbing discovery.
Albuquerque 911. What's the address of the emergency?
It's actually up in the open space off of Copper.
What's going on out there?
I ran into a girl. She's just wearing her underwear and a pair of socks. She said that she had been raped.
We get the call of a woman that is in the foothills that one of the witnesses came upon, and they immediately dispatch officers.
Before police arrive, bystanders have retrieved the woman's clothes from the scene of the crime. Police find the woman further up the trail near an encampment. She identifies herself as 30-year-old Angela Sanford.
The witnesses described that she had been wearing a bikini top, underwear, and socks, and had blood. She claimed that she had been raped and that the person was close by.
Angela doesn't offer further details on the state of her attacker, but the witnesses say that the male is laying unconscious up the trail. After making sure Angela is safe, officers leave her to be treated by paramedics and begin searching the area.
One of the men who was a witness pointed out to where the person who did it was at, and it was up the trail a little, a distance.
Officers found a male laying kind of in the kneeling, praying position almost, with his pants a little undone, and he was unresponsive. Per protocol for officer safety, he was handcuffed, and then they rolled him over onto his back, and that's when they saw all the stab wounds. He had stab wounds on his chest, and it looked like on his face and in his neck as well. Paramedics were called out to the scene, and they were the ones that actually pronounced him as deceased. He had a wallet on him, and we identified the deceased person that we had in custody as 50-year-old Joe Leyva from Albuquerque.
Detectives and the assigned prosecutor are called to the puzzling scene.
As soon as I arrived, one of the detectives told me that it was their understanding that a woman had stabbed a man who was trying to rape her. Myself and the detectives went up to the crime scene to do a walkthrough. And the first thing you see, of course, is the decedent right there on the ground, handcuffed behind his back. There was a rope on the ground to the right. There was also a dagger on the ground. In the area, there are some people who are just walking through, doing their normal hiking. There are a few witnesses who are standing around waiting to be talked to, including Miss Sanford.
They kept the witnesses there at the scene and started interviewing them immediately.
But to seasoned detectives, the crime scene simply doesn't add up.
Her story was confusing. The whole thing was bizarre. I have a woman that claims that she was raped. She has blood on her. And this man has been stabbed numerous times. And there is what appears to be almost overkill that doesn't fit an act of self-defense. What the hell is going on here?
The officers called my mother early in the a.m. that my father had passed. I remember just breaking down, falling to my knees. We didn't even know what happened.
Joel Leyva was born on June 13, 1957, in Española, New Mexico. He was one of 3 brothers raised in a religious household.
Faith has always been a big part of our family. We didn't get to go out much. We were ministers' kids, pastors' kids. Well, I had 2 older brothers, Joel, and then my older brother, Amos. Amos ended up going to Bible college. Joel was about the same time getting ready to go into the military.
In 1976, my father felt like he had a calling to serve his country, so he decided to join the Marine Corps, and he was enlisted, and he was in there for 4 years.
After his time in the Marines, Joel returned to New Mexico, where he fell in love with a local girl named Betty Lujan.
My father and my mother were a best man, and they made up honor at their family member's wedding. And they kind of they sparked. And they got together and fell in love, and the rest is history, I guess. My parents got married in the early 80s. My mother worked at the courthouse, retired from the state of New Mexico. My father was in logistics, shipping and receiving.
Joel and Betty had 2 children together and spent the next 3 decades enjoying family, friends, and the fruits of their labor.
My parents had a great relationship, always laughing, always, having a good time. There was, always jokes and stuff in the house. We did everything together.
He was a people person, It didn't take him long to make a friend. He just friendly to everybody, treated everybody fairly.
My father would definitely help anybody he saw in need of any kind of help. We didn't have much growing up, but he would give his shirt off his back to help somebody.
By 2010, the children had grown up and started families of their own.
The last time I saw my dad, we were just hanging out and having a good time, and just like another day for us. I remember walking out the door, and I looked back and I saw him sitting at the table. Little did I know that I was never going to see him again.
Now, Joel has been found stabbed to death in the New Mexico foothills, and police have been told it was the result of an attempted sexual assault.
Witnesses had initially said that when they came across Angela for the first time, she was wearing blue bikini top, panties, socks, and like a long stocking with holes cut in it to use as a glove. She had blood on her right thigh, and she had blood on her cheek as well.
She said she had gotten on top of him and then stabbed him and ran away. Everything seemed to generally make sense.
Since Angela is too distraught to provide police with more details, officers prepare to take her in for a routine assault examination. But as Angela is removed from the scene, one of the witnesses surprises them with another detail.
They were told from witnesses that there was a possible second suspect. She described him as a 30 or 40-year-old Caucasian male. He was still out there.
Some of the hikers who found Angela direct police to an area near the crime scene.
The witnesses were saying that they noticed up above them on this pretty steep incline, they noticed that there was a man that kept peering up over the rocks and looking down.
They were directed to the boulders above the scene, and that's where officers spotted the second possible suspect. One of the officers withdrew her handgun, pointed it up at the rocks, told him to come down. He complied, he came down, they handcuffed him, and then dragged him out of the scene as well.
The man identifies himself as John Epler and is brought in for further questioning.
We did not have Joel's side of the story. At this point, we could only accept what Angela told us. But I was treating her as a potential homicide suspect.
Coming up, police question a suspect.
I'm thinking, okay, they're gonna figure out I'm innocent.
And Angela's story begins to unravel.
When she started becoming super defensive, that told me something was definitely wrong with this picture.
As investigators attempt to piece together an alleged attack that left one man dead, they must interrogate the other living suspect. Before questioning John Epler, detectives further examine the scene and almost immediately notice something that strikes them as odd.
The weapon used to kill Mr. Leyva was a so-called ceremonial dagger.
I found it to be rather fantastical. It looked like it had some Egyptian markings, more of a fantasy thing, more of the type of thing you would display.
For hiking, it was a little strange, but if she's trying to defend herself, yeah, she would use any weapon that she'd find.
I'm asking her, why are you bringing a dagger that you describe as a ceremonial dagger with you? It just didn't add up.
The ornate dagger isn't the only strange piece of evidence they find.
One of the witnesses actually took Angela back so that she could retrieve her clothes. They said when they went to the scene, Angela's clothes were neatly folded, which is kind of unusual.
The fact that her clothes were nicely folded instead of just thrown off like you would think would have happened in something like a rape. That didn't make sense.
While Angela is sent to be inspected by the sexual assault nurse examiners, detectives head to the police station to question their surviving suspect.
Going into the interview with Mr. Epler, I needed to find his if he had any involvement in this whatsoever. Mr. Epler stated that he did not know Joel, he did not know Angela, and that he didn't witness any of what was going on.
Right away, I'm thinking, okay, these are smart people. They're going to know I didn't. They're going to figure this out right away. They're going to know I'm innocent, you know. They're going to figure out I'm innocent. I had a hard day at work, and I decided to relieve some stress and go up to the mountains. And I was just trying to get rid of some energy and wear myself out and be tired so I could sleep. So I wasn't there to walk on the trails. I was there to go up a really difficult ravine. And so I'm cutting across the mesa, and I notice there's a girl out there off the beaten trails. At the time, the very first thing that came to my mind was a vulnerable female shouldn't be in an isolated area. The closer I got, the more hysterical she was. You could tell she was panicking about something.
Epler says he didn't want to scare the woman, so he kept hiking.
I was probably up there a couple hours at least. On my way down, I get to this kind of a flat area with this big boulder in front of me. And I look over the boulder and I see a bunch of police officers walking the area. And the very first thing that goes through my mind is, you're gonna go to jail. So then my mind says, well, you didn't do anything. What would you go to jail for? I didn't do anything. So I pick my head up over the edge and I look down, and there's a police officer down there, and he looks at me and he says, and he yells at me, hey, get down here. And I said, what's going on? What is going on? And he said, we're gonna find out.
When they ask him why he thought he was going to jail, he gives them an innocent explanation.
I said, hey, I have a confession to make. I got a marijuana pipe in my pocket. So at that point, they bring in these people and they say, we're gonna take a DNA sample. And I said, yes, please do. I want you to take a DNA sample. This will prove my innocence.
At this point, we had no evidence to suggest that John Epler was involved in the alleged rape or raping of Angela Sanford. The impression I got is that he's more of a reluctant witness to this, so he was released without charges.
Now, detectives need to speak with Angela about the misidentified alleged attacker.
Somebody who's gone through something that traumatic, we don't want to not believe them, but I got a call from the detectives. They told me that they had concerns about her story.
It's really common for survivors of rape, sexual assault to not remember everything at first, to misremember things, report things, several days or weeks later as they're processing the trauma that occurred.
We have sexual assault nurse examiners that are trained in the forensic collection of evidence for women who are the victims of sexual violence. And Miss Sanford was taken to be examined. After she was examined, the case agent had an opportunity then to sit down with her.
My initial interview with Angela, the first time I actually talked to her, was at the police station. I believe it was a little after midnight. Angela was displaying signs of being distraught, still distraught.
She starts by saying this was not a random attack. She knew Joel Leyva.
She said that she had contact with him, inviting him to go celebrate the Wiccan holiday up in the foothills. Joel agreed to go up with her.
Miss Sanford said that she had been in the area celebrating the Wiccan holiday of Beltane. And immediately I knew that wasn't true.
Angela Sanford has just revealed to investigators that she invited Joel Leyva to the mountains that day to celebrate a Wiccan ceremony. Detectives have her start from the beginning.
Angela tells us that she had met Joel at the casino a couple days before. she was unemployed. She was looking for a possible job. Joel said he could possibly offer him if she had a resume. They ended up exchanging phone numbers. Then they left the casino. A couple days later, they were texting each other back and forth.
My dad was always meeting new people, always trying to help people out, be that, open ear.
They struck up a relationship, and through phone calls and text messages, she invited him to participate in this Wiccan holiday.
Angela explains that she's a follower of Wicca, a pagan religion whose practitioners are often referred to as witches.
I have never had an incident involving anyone who called themselves a Wiccan witch.
On the 22nd of March, Angela states that Joel called her to check in.
Angela had stated that she was going up to do a Wiccan ceremony up at the foothills and asked him if he wanted to come along.
According to Angela, the ceremony was meant to celebrate a Gaelic holiday known as Beltane.
She claims that she felt it was going to be a time where maybe she could convert him to her faith.
The communication between the two of them only started a few days prior, but they had set up to meet in this particular area.
She said her boyfriend dropped her off at the trailhead.
Joel arrives shortly thereafter and is walking behind her. The two of them had drinks.
Angela says the hike started out innocently enough, but once they got deeper into the wilderness, things took a turn.
She stated that she veered off to the site where she was going to hold the ceremony. They're off the trail now, east of the trailhead, kind of behind some boulders where even if you were walking on the trailhead, you would not have been able to see them at all.
Her account is she gets up to use the restroom and he starts asking, "Can I watch?" And she says, no, and kind of goes and pulls down her pants, and then he comes up behind her. She claims that he then starts fondling her.
She had a rope around her, a ceremonial rope around her waist that she said that he removed and tried to tie her hands with behind her back. But apparently he tied it loose.
Although she'd managed to free herself from the rope, Angela didn't think she could escape without Joel hurting her.
She's talking about how Joel takes this dagger that she had kind of out of her pocket, is using it kind of against her.
So in cases of sexual assault, common reactions are going to be fawning, which is, kind of trying to make nice with the assailant, sort of just trying to do whatever you can to stay alive.
She said that she grabs the dagger and as an effort to get away, stabbed him about 3 or 4 times and then ran.
As Angela tells this story of her harrowing escape, investigators compare it to what witnesses described at the scene. And there's one detail that just doesn't line up.
She's talking about how she makes this split-second decision, and then she goes off running.
Her clothes were nicely folded and set to the side. Typically, in a rape situation, there's not going to be time for somebody to nicely, neatly fold their clothes.
And to seasoned detectives, the way Angela tells the story is another cause for concern.
Angela was not forthcoming with a lot of details. When she started becoming super defensive and then shut down the interview herself, that told me something was that's definitely wrong with this picture.
Coming up, police make an unsettling discovery.
She would post about vampires, dark beings.
And the real reason for Angela and Joelle's wilderness trip is revealed.
All kinds of bells went off at that point. Why would she list him as sacrifice unless that was her actual intent?
After their troubling interview with Angela Sanford, investigators are questioning whether there's more to her wilderness trip with Joelle Leyva than she's willing to share. But they want to tread carefully.
We want to make sure if this person was actually being raped, that we're treating them with respect and courtesy. And we more especially don't want to re-traumatize them.
They begin with an analysis of her sexual assault examination.
Through that examination, they did not find evidence that there was sexual intercourse, and they did not find anything that they believed would be consistent with sexual violence.
No evidence of defensive marks, bruising, or scrapes of anything other than some abrasions, mild abrasions on her knees.
There was nothing. No rope burns, no semen, no anything that would corroborate any belief that she had been sexually assaulted.
To hear those allegations against my father that he could have committed something like that was, I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way. That's not who he was.
The fact that there was not only no evidence of an actual rape, but no real evidence of an attempted rape, that obviously is a problem for Miss Sanford's story.
The autopsy on Joelle Leyva also disputes some of Angela's claims.
She had said that she had stabbed him about 3 times and then run away. And he was stabbed well over 20 times.
That many stab wounds indicated it was personal. It wasn't defensive in my experience.
When Joelle's loved ones are informed of the circumstances of his death, they find it even harder to believe.
We had so many questions and we just didn't have any answers. A very, very emotional time. Hearing those stories come out and reading about those stories, it just, it was not him.
The family made it very, very clear that there's no way that he would have gone to practice this Wiccan, witchcraft, pagan holiday. He was a practicing Catholic who was very committed to his faith.
Hearing the word wicked, that was a shock. I remember them asking something about if he practiced it, anything like that. Obviously, he didn't.
He was very well loved by his family. He was married, a large family. He was a very religious man.
The family insists Joelle would never harm another person, let alone commit sexual assault.
When I first heard that she was claiming that he would raped her, Joelle would never rape a woman.
My father, very open, very friendly, very giving. My dad always told us never lay your hands on a woman. I know he believed that, and I know he lived by that. So hearing all that, it made us even more angry.
Still, investigators question why Angela would make up such an elaborate and unusual account. A background check provides some alarming answers.
Angela Sanford, in 1999, had made an allegation of rape. She claimed that she went willingly with 2 guys to a motel. There they did some illegal drugs and she ended up being raped at gunpoint.
But she didn't want to move forward in that case, it seemed. She didn't really have the response to the investigators that they were looking for. She kind of skipped out on the scheduled interview time, and so the case was dropped.
It takes a lot for people to come forward, victims, and disclose that they've been sexually assaulted. So it is possible that it was a legitimate complaint.
To gain insight into Angela's history, officers obtain the contact information for her boyfriend and request that he come to the station for an interview.
He stated that he did drop her off at the trailhead, and she had told him come back in about an hour. So in about an hour, he called. She didn't answer. He called again, didn't answer. So he assumed that she was ignoring him or that she had just turned off the phone.
But according to Angela's boyfriend, the reason she gave for going on the trip is dubious at best.
He told us that she was not a Wiccan witch, that she was a Wiccan wannabe.
Miss Sanford was born and raised here in Albuquerque.
She was born into a family where there was considerable dysfunction, and she described her relationship with her father as one of fear and hatred.
At 19, Angela moved to Illinois with her boyfriend at the time, and they both were into the alternative religions, the occult, and paganism. She sort of began to lean more into the occult, which could possibly have just been a way to escape that wasn't solely pagan or solely Wiccan. She would go into the woods alone with books, candles, other things to do, rituals that she felt were, aligned into these beliefs. She was making her own kind of conglomerate of a religion.
It almost felt like you didn't want to tread too far down because you weren't really sure what you were going to find out and if you wanted to know.
After that, I had my doubts about Angela's story.
Investigators have just gained insight into Angela Sanford's complicated history and obsession with dark magic. Despite her past, Angela's boyfriend says he doesn't believe she's capable of such a brutal crime.
He defended Miss Sanford vigorously, that there is no way that she would have done this, that he completely supported her story.
The boyfriend was kind of this crux piece that gave you an insight to who she was in the days leading up to this and what she's watching, what she's indulging in, and how that led to this very real situation.
When investigators take a look at Angela Sanford's online alter ego, they find evidence of a deeply troubled woman.
She had 2 different social media accounts, one of those being a MySpace account, I believe at the time, and that had a lot more of like pentagrams and things that really referenced more of a satanic lifestyle, a satanic worship.
Angela was very active on her social media. She would post about vampires, dark beings. She also was very interested in serial killers and the notoriety that they would gain from their crimes.
Sometimes when you have somebody who really gets enthralled with serial killers, enthralled with the idea of murder, they start fantasizing about murder.
Detectives are unfamiliar with any of the rituals and beliefs Angela was practicing, so they reach out to local experts.
I called the local coven, and I ended up speaking to them. And they ended up telling me that Beltane usually occurs in May, not in March when this incident occurred.
Detectives subpoena Angela's phone records to see for themselves what Angela and Joel discussed.
Angela says they meet at the casino, right? And kind of just spark up a conversation, agree to kind of meet again. She started to claim that he was the one who reached out. And it wasn't until the phone records came back that detectives realized, no, she called him. She told him, I want to see you, and let's get together.
But it's clear the invitation had nothing to do with convincing Joel to convert.
When I finally found his contact in her phone, she didn't list him as Joel Leva or just Joel. She listed him as Sacrifice. All kinds of bells went off at that point. She told us that she was there for a Wiccan ceremony. Why would she list him as Sacrifice? Unless that was her actual intent in meeting Joel in the first place.
The revelation confirms investigators' worst suspicions.
The fact that she listed him as Sacrifice, the fact that she lured him to a spot where nobody could see them, all led me to believe that she had intentionally planned this out to kill Joel as part of her so-called Wiccan celebration. Motive answers why. The only person that could answer that one is Angela herself, okay? She's the only one that could tell us why she did what she did.
On March 24th, 2 days after Joel's death, Angela is arrested.
It was disturbing and made me, frankly, feel better as we were about to go to a grand jury to say, this is a predetermined first-degree murder and that she needed to be charged for it.
Despite the evidence against Angela, prosecutors still fear a jury might sympathize with her.
This is a woman that has had a history of relationships with abusive men.
If she was able to convince one or more jurors that what she had initially said was true, then she could have certainly hung a jury, and then the murderer potentially goes free.
Following Angela Sanford's arrest, word of the disturbing case spreads quickly through the town of Albuquerque. But not everyone is pleased by the publicity.
There was a lot of concern from people in the Wiccan community that we were trying to paint the Wiccan community as somebody who would be into committing murder as a part of a ceremony and things like that. And so from the very beginning, we tried to be very clear that we didn't believe that this was truly a Wiccan ceremony.
I learned that Wiccans don't sacrifice. Beltane was about celebrating the earth, the renewal of the earth.
It's a very generally nature-based religion, a very peaceful religion.
Prosecutors believe Angela's twisted interpretation of the rituals were a pretense for murder.
What would drive this woman to take this victim, this man that she met at a casino, and lure him basically to the mountains and murder him in cold blood? Clearly, in my mind, she targeted him.
And this identity was her compensatory mechanism of having power as a solution for her early life where she felt she didn't have any.
Jonathan told us, he wanted to do the plea deal because you never know what could happen in a trial. Ultimately, we agreed to it.
We decided to offer a second-degree murder that was aggravated. We wanted the guarantee of a conviction.
Angela accepts the plea deal, and in December 2011, she appears in court for sentencing.
There was a bunch of us in the family that showed up in court, and that's what we all saw her for the first time. I know she looked at me because I look a little bit like Joelle. So our eyes caught. She looked at me for a second, we just stared at each other. And I just stared at her like, took my brother, really?
Angela's lawyers ask for a reduced sentence, arguing that her perception of reality is impaired.
It didn't ever feel like she really was attuned to what was kind of happening around her. You almost got the sense from her that it's like she didn't understand where her fantasy ended and where reality began.
However, they are unable to produce any witnesses to support her.
I don't remember anybody coming to speak on her behalf to try to convince the judge to give her a lesser sentence. And ultimately, he didn't. He gave her the maximum sentence he was allowed to.
She doesn't give a statement. The information that we have is she felt like she had to sacrifice somebody. And regrettably, that person was Mr. Leyva.
As a family, 20 years is not enough for what she did, what she admitted to doing. Should have been life in prison and never see the light of day again.
This was somebody who lured somebody to this location to complete a human sacrifice. I don't care how tough and crusty of an investigator you are, that's chilling to the bone.
I feel for the family of Mr. Leyva. They lost a good man.
Yeah, I miss you, Joelle. I miss you, bro. I love you. I'll never forget you. All that's memories that I'll cherish and keep forever.
There's probably not a day that goes by I don't think of him. There's not a day that goes by I don't think about my dad. Riding in my truck to work, a song comes on the radio, and I know my dad loves this song, and I just feel the sense that he's with me.
The transition of seasons is often accompanied by a general sense of renewal and hope. But on a specific late afternoon in the month of March in the year 2010, a peaceful desert trailhead outside the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, became the setting for a tragedy that would shock the local community and puzzle experienced investigators. The Copper Trailhead is known to many as a serene escape where working people go to unwind, walk among the majestic rocks, and enjoy the quiet solace of the high desert. Yet, shortly before 6 in the evening, this tranquility was broken when hikers encountered a woman who appeared to be in a state of severe distress. The woman, later identified as 30-year-old Angela Sanford, was wearing only her undergarments and socks, and she claimed to have been the victim of a terrible assault. She pointed toward the trail and claimed that her attacker was still nearby, leaving the witnesses to immediately contact emergency response operators. When the first responding officers arrived at the scene, they were met with a highly chaotic and emotionally charged environment. The witnesses had already retrieved the woman's clothes from further up the trail, and the woman herself was visibly shaking and crying. She maintained that she had been forced to defend herself against an attacker who was now lying unconscious further up the mountain path. Following standard procedures for personal safety and public security, the officers left the woman under the care of medical personnel and proceeded cautiously up the trail to locate the individual. A short distance away, tucked behind a series of large desert boulders, They found a man in a kneeling position with his clothing partially undone. He was completely unresponsive. Following safety protocols, the officers placed handcuffs on the individual before rolling him over to assess his condition. It was at this moment that they realized they were not dealing avec épée, a simple physical altercation, but a tragic loss of life. The man had sustained multiple serious wounds to his upper body, neck, and face. Paramedics soon arrived at the location and officially pronounced him deceased, identifying him from the credentials in his wallet as 50-year-old Joel Leva, a resident of Albuquerque. As specialized investigators and the assigned prosecutor arrived to process the scene, they began to analyze the physical layout of the area. On the surface, the narrative provided by the woman seemed to suggest a classic case of self-defense against an attempted physical assault. However, as experienced professionals began to walk through the crime scene, several glaring inconsistencies began to emerge. The first highly unusual detail was the weapon found lying on the ground near the deceased. It was not a common tool or a standard pocket knife that one might carry for personal defense while hiking. Instead, it was an ornate, highly stylized ceremonial dagger, decorated avec épée hat, intricate historical and fantasy markings that resembled ancient Egyptian symbols. Such a weapon was entirely out of place for a casual hike in the foothills. Furthermore, a length of rope was discovered lying on the ground nearby. The physical state of the scene presented further questions for the detectives. When the witnesses had assisted the woman in retrieving her clothing prior to the arrival of the police, they noted that her garments had been folded in a neat, orderly pile on the ground. For investigators who have spent years studying the behavioral patterns of individuals in high-stress situations, this detail was highly anomalous. In a scenario involving a sudden, violent struggle and a desperate flight for survival, an individual does not typically take the time to meticulously fold their clothing and set it aside in an orderly fashion. The chaotic nature of an actual assault generally leaves a trail of discarded items, torn fabric, and physical disarray. The presence of neatly arranged clothing suggested a degree of deliberation and calm that did not align with the narrative of a spontaneous struggle. While the primary scene was being documented, another critical development occurred. Hikers who had been in the area pointed out a second individual who had been acting suspiciously nearby. This man was spotted on a steep incline above the crime scene, peering down over the boulders at the gathering police officers. Officers drew their duty weapons and ordered the man to descend from the rocks. He complied immediately and was placed in custody for questioning. The man was identified as John Epler. During his subsequent interview at the police station, he explained his presence in a highly candid and cooperative manner. He stated that he had gone to the rugged area to engage in strenuous hiking to relieve stress after a difficult day at work. On his way down the mountain, he had noticed the heavy police presence and panicked because he was in possession of a small pipe used for consuming prohibited plant material. He eagerly offered to provide a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid to prove his complete innocence and establish that he had no physical contact with either the deceased or the woman. The digital and physical evidence quickly corroborated his story, and he was cleared of any involvement, leaving investigators to focus entirely on the relationship between the deceased man and his accuser. To understand the profound tragedy of this event, it is essential to examine the life of the victim, Joel Leva. Born in the month of June in the year 1957, in the town of Espanola, New Mexico, He was raised in a deeply spiritual and loving household as one of 3 brothers. His family was closely tied to their community, with his father serving as a minister, which instilled a strong sense of moral responsibility and faith in the children from an early age. In the year 1976, driven by a desire to serve his nation, Joel enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, serving honorably for 4 years. Upon returning to his home state, he met and fell in love with a local woman named Betty Lou John. The couple married in the early 1980s and built a life centered around their 2 children, their extended family, and their shared values. Joel spent several decades working in the field of logistics, managing shipping and receiving operations, while his wife worked for the local court system. Those who knew Joel Leyva described him as an exceptionally warm, friendly, and generous individual who would literally give the shirt off his back to help someone in need. He was a devoted family man, a practicing Catholic who took his faith very seriously, and someone who possessed an easygoing sense of humor. His children recalled a household filled vacap, aphmau laughter, and a father who consistently taught them the importance of treating others, vacap aphmau kindness and respect, emphasizing that one should never raise a hand in anger against another person. By the year 2010, his children had grown and established families of their own, and Joel was enjoying his role as a grandfather. The sudden and violent end to his life left his family in a state of utter devastation and disbelief, a pain that was compounded by the distressing allegations made against his character by the woman at the trailhead. The initial claims of physical assault began to disintegrate rapidly under the scrutiny of medical and forensic science. Following standard procedures, Angela Sanford was taken to a specialized facility where trained forensic nurses conducted a comprehensive physical examination designed to collect evidence of sexual violence. The results of this examination were highly telling. There were no physical injuries, bruises, defensive marks, or abrasions on her body that would suggest she had been subjected to a violent struggle, with the exception of minor scrapes on her knees. There was no evidence of binding, no rope burns on her wrists, and no scientific material that would support her claims of a struggle. Furthermore, the autopsy report on Joel Leyva presented a reality that was entirely inconsistent with her claim of self-defense. Angela had asserted during her initial questioning that she had grabbed the dagger in a moment of panic, inflicted a few minor wounds to free herself, and immediately fled. However, the medical examiner documented well over 20 serious wounds on the victim. In the professional judgment of the investigators, the sheer number of wounds indicated an intense level of personal focus and deliberate force that went far beyond any plausible act of self-defense. Recognizing the growing discrepancies, detectives initiated a thorough investigation into Angela S.'s personal background, social media presence, and communication history. An examination of public records revealed that she had a history of making similar allegations in the past, including an incident in the year 1999 where she had reported an assault but subsequently refused to cooperate with authorities, leading to the dismissal of the case. While investigators always treat jhene reports with the utmost seriousness to avoid re-traumatizing actual survivors, they had to remain objective in the face of conflicting physical evidence. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators analyzed the mobile phone records of both the suspect and the victim. Angela had initially claimed that Joel was a casual acquaintance whom she had met at a local establishment, and that he had been the one to aggressively pursue her and initiate contact. However, the digital logs painted a completely different picture. The records demonstrated that it was Angela who had repeatedly contacted Joel, actively inviting him to meet her in the remote foothills of Albuquerque under the pretense of participating in an outdoor ceremony. She had claimed that the gathering was intended to observe a traditional Gaelic seasonal celebration known as Beltane, a spring festival associated with the renewal of nature. However, local cultural experts pointed out a highly ironic flaw in her narrative. The actual festival of Beltane takes place in the month of May, whereas this event occurred in the middle of March. This logical error suggested that her understanding of the traditions she claimed to practice was superficial at best, serving as a mere cover story for a much more sinister objective. The most chilling revelation of the entire investigation emerged directly from the contact list stored within Angela S.'s mobile phone. When detectives located Joel Leyva S.'s phone number in her device, they discovered that she had not saved his entry under his actual name, or even a casual nickname. Instead, she had saved his contact information under the literal designation of sacrifice. This single piece of evidence completely shattered any remaining pretense of self-defense or accidental escalation. It demonstrated to a mathematical certainty that the meeting in the desert was not a casual outing that had gone tragically wrong, but a pre-planned, deliberate effort to lure an unsuspecting, kind-hearted man to an isolated location for the purpose of ending his life as part of a dark, personal obsession. Further interviews with Angela's boyfriend confirmed that she had developed a deep and unhealthy preoccupation with the occult, dark alternative lifestyles and the histories of notorious public figures associated with violent acts. Her online social media profiles, particularly on popular platforms of that era, were filled with symbols, dark imagery, and posts expressing a desire for notoriety and an attraction to dark themes. Her boyfriend described her as someone who had become entirely consumed by these destructive fantasies, constructing a complex online persona that she struggled to separate from reality. It became clear to the prosecution and the defense alike that her actions were driven by a profound psychological distortion, wherein she sought to enact a fantasy of power and control to compensate for personal struggles and perceived powerlessness in her early life. On the 24th of March in the year 2010, just 2 days after the tragic event, Angela Sanford was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The strength of the physical and digital evidence, particularly the designation of the victim as a sacrifice in her phone, provided the prosecution with an exceptionally strong case. However, legal proceedings always carry a degree of unpredictability, and prosecutors had to consider the potential risks of a prolonged trial. There was a concern that a skilled defense might attempt to appeal to the sympathy of a jury by focusing on her personal history of instability, potentially leading to a compromised verdict. To ensure a guaranteed conviction and secure justice for the Leyva family, the prosecution offered a plea agreement for the charge of second-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. In December of the year 2011, the case reached its conclusion in a court of law. Angela Sanford accepted the plea agreement, and the presiding judge sentenced her to the maximum allowable penalty under the terms of the agreement, which was a term of 20 years in a state correctional facility. During the emotional sentencing hearing, members of the Leyva family stood before the court to express their profound grief and honor the memory of a beloved husband, father, and brother, whose life had been taken so needlessly. While the family expressed that 20 years was a modest penalty for a life so deliberately stolen, they found some measure of peace in the fact that the truth had been fully revealed to the public, completely vindicating Joel's honor and clearing his name of any false allegations. This tragic case offers several profound lessons for personal safety, community awareness, and the advancement of law enforcement techniques. From a perspective of personal safety, it serves as a stern warning about the potential dangers of interacting with capte hat individuals who exhibit signs of unstable or highly obsessive behavior, particularly when those individuals live in highly detached fantasy worlds. Joel Leva, in his characteristic kindness, had simply wanted to help someone who claimed to be looking for employment and seeking a friendly ear. His generous nature was tragically exploited by someone who viewed his kindness as an opportunity. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries when meeting acquaintances, ensuring that such meetings always take place in highly visible, public settings, and informing trusted family members or friends of one's whereabouts and plans. For the law enforcement community, the resolution of this case highlights the critical importance of meticulous scene analysis, objective medical evaluations, and rapid digital forensics. The investigating officers and detectives demonstrated exceptional professionalism by refusing to accept the initial self-defense narrative at face value, by carefully documenting the anomalies of the scene, such as the neatly folded clothing and the highly impractical ceremonial weapon, and relying on the scientific findings of the forensic medical examiners. They were able to build an undeniable framework of facts. The swift acquisition and analysis of mobile phone records and digital footprints proved to be the ultimate key to solving the case, demonstrating how modern technology can be utilized to quickly dismantle fabricated alibis and bring perpetrators to justice. Ultimately, the story of this investigation is a testament to the victory of truth over deception, the dedication of those who serve the cause of justice, and the enduring memory of a good man whose legacy of kindness will never be forgotten by his family and community. The staging of criminal acts to fabricate a narrative of self-defense represents one of the most complex challenges faced by modern law enforcement officers. This phenomenon, often referred to by criminologists as crime scene staging, typically involves a perpetrator manipulating physical evidence, personal belongings, and their own physical appearance to deflect suspicion and escape accountability. When individuals engage in such elaborate fabrications, they are frequently driven by deep-seated psychological motivations, which can range from personality disorders and severe antisocial tendencies to a desperate desire to fulfill violent fantasies while maintaining a public facade of vulnerability or victimhood. In many cases, these individuals construct highly customized, distorted belief systems that serve as a psychological justification for their actions, allowing them to dissociate from the gravity of their crimes. By examining the underlying factors of these cases, researchers and investigators can better understand why hot tragedies occur and how the community can remain vigilant against individuals who seek to exploit the trust and goodwill of others. The frequency of these staged incidents, while relatively low compared to other forms of violent crime, highlights a persistent vulnerability within social structures. Perpetrators often target individuals who are known for their generous, helpful, and trusting nature, exploiting these positive human traits to lure them into isolated environments where assistance is unavailable. This predatory behavior is frequently facilitated by modern communication technologies and digital spaces where individuals can easily project false identities, coordinate private meetings, and obscure their true intentions. When a vulnerable or psychologically unstable person becomes deeply immersed in extreme subcultures or online communities that sensationalize violence, the boundary between fantasy and reality can become increasingly blurred. This psychological escalation can lead them to believe that they can successfully execute a violent plan and deceive professional investigators by simply presenting a superficial narrative of survival. To deconstruct these complex fabrications, law enforcement agencies rely on a meticulous combination of physical evidence, medical examinations, behavioral analysis, and digital forensics. One of the most critical aspects of any investigation involving a claim of self-defense is the close inspection of the physical crime scene. A genuine struggle for survival is inherently chaotic, resulting in randomly scattered personal items, torn clothing, and unpredictable patterns of physical evidence. When investigators discover a scene where personal items are arranged in an orderly fashion or clothing is folded with precision, it immediately suggests a level of deliberation and control that is entirely inconsistent with a sudden, violent encounter. The choice of weapon also serves as a significant behavioral clue. While a person defending themselves in an emergency will typically utilize whatever object is immediately available, a perpetrator who carries a highly specialized or ornate instrument, such as a ceremonial blade, demonstrates a high degree of preparation and intent. In addition to scene analysis, forensic medical examinations play a pivotal role in revealing the truth behind staged claims. Forensic pathologists and medical examiners can easily distinguish between genuine defensive injuries, which typically include abrasions on the hands, forearms, and lower extremities, and self-inflicted or superficial marks designed to simulate a struggle. Furthermore, the concept of overkill, characterized by an excessive number of injuries, far exceeding what would be necessary to neutralize a perceived threat, strongly indicates an intentional, focused assault rather than a desperate attempt to escape. Ultimately, the integration of digital forensics has revolutionized the speed and accuracy of these investigations. Mobile devices, text messaging archives, and social media footprints provide an objective, chronological record of the relationship between the parties involved, often revealing the premeditated nature of the crime through specific search queries, messaging logs, and contact classifications that directly contradict the suspect's verbal claims. Preventing such tragic occurrences requires a multifaceted approach involving community education, digital literacy, and proactive psychological intervention. Individuals must be encouraged to maintain healthy boundaries when interacting with new acquaintances, particularly those met through casual or online environments. When planning to meet someone in an isolated area, it is of paramount importance to inform trusted family members or friends of the specific location, the identity of the individual, and the expected time frame of the meeting. From a law enforcement perspective, accelerating the resolution of these cases depends heavily on the rapid deployment of digital forensic tools and specialized training in behavioral analysis. By equipping responding officers and detectives with the skills to quickly identify behavioral inconsistencies and access communication records, agencies can prevent the unnecessary diversion of investigative resources and ensure that innocent bystanders are not wrongfully scrutinized during the critical early stages of an inquiry. The foothills surrounding the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, are widely recognized for their natural beauty and serene landscapes, offering residents a peaceful retreat from the bustle of urban life. On the afternoon of March 22nd in the year 2010, numerous outdoor enthusiasts were enjoying the trails near the Copper Trailhead, appreciating the mild spring weather. However, shortly before 6 in the evening, this tranquility was abruptly interrupted when a group of hikers encountered a young woman who appeared to be in a state of extreme distress. The woman, who was wearing only her undergarments and socks, was visibly shaken and claimed to have barely survived a physical assault. She directed the bystanders to a location further up the trail, stating that the individual who had attacked her was still in the immediate area. The bystanders quickly assisted the woman, helping her retrieve her personal belongings and alerting emergency services by dialing 911. Upon receiving the call, dispatchers immediately sent police officers and medical personnel to the foothills. When the first officers arrived at the scene, they found the young woman, who identified herself as 30-year-old Angela Sanford, being attended to by paramedics near the entrance of the trail. While Sanford was being prepared for transport to a medical facility, officers proceeded further up the mountainside to locate the individual she had described as her assailant. Deep within the rocky terrain, off the main pathway, and obscured by large boulders, officers discovered a male individual in a kneeling position near a small clearing. Adhering to standard safety protocols, the officers approached the unresponsive man, secured him, and immediately requested medical assistance. Upon conducting a physical assessment, the responders observed that the man had sustained numerous sharp force injuries to his upper torso, neck, and face. Paramedics who arrived at the clearing shortly thereafter determined that the individual had succumbed to his injuries. A search of his personal effects revealed identification, indicating that the deceased man was 50-year-old Joel Leyva, a resident of Albuquerque. As specialized homicide detectives and prosecutors arrived to manage the active crime scene, they initially proceeded under the assumption that the incident was a tragic case of self-defense arising from an attempted assault. However, as the detectives began their initial walkthrough of the area, several glaring inconsistencies began to emerge. Near the body of the deceased, investigators discovered a length of rope and an unusually ornate, ceremonial dagger featuring intricate markings reminiscent of fantasy designs. The presence of such a highly specific weapon, rather than a common utility knife or an improvised tool, immediately raised questions about how the item had arrived at the scene. Furthermore, the physical condition of the immediate area did not suggest a chaotic struggle. The clothing belonging to the young woman was found neatly arranged and folded to the side of the clearing, a detail that strongly contradicted the narrative of a sudden, desperate escape from a physical threat. In addition, the sheer number of injuries observed on the deceased, which totaled more than 20 distinct wounds, suggested a level of focused intensity that far exceeded what is typically associated with a defensive countermeasure. These unusual findings prompted the investigative team to adopt a highly cautious and analytical approach as they began to gather statements from witnesses and reconstruct the timeline of events. During the initial phase of the investigation, several hikers informed the officers that they had observed another individual acting suspiciously in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. According to these witnesses, a man had been seen peering down from the steep rocky incline situated directly above the clearing where the body was found. Fearing the presence of a second suspect or an accomplice, officers secured the high ground and located a male individual hiding among the boulders. After being instructed to descend, the man complied with the officers' directives and was taken into custody for questioning. The detained individual was identified as John Epler, who explained to detectives that he had no connection to either the deceased man or the young woman. Epler stated that he had experienced a challenging day at his place of employment and had decided to visit the foothills to engage in a strenuous hike to relieve stress. He explained that he had chosen to ascend a difficult off-trail ravine rather than utilizing the established paths. While navigating the aiko rocks, he had noticed a young woman in the distance who appeared to be behaving hysterically. Unwilling to cause alarm, he had continued his climb and remained in the upper area for several hours. Epler further explained that upon his descent, he had looked over a large boulder and observed numerous police officers arriving at the scene. Fearing that he would be arrested because he was in possession of a small quantity of personal contraband, he had hesitated to make his presence known. He immediately agreed to provide a biological sample to the forensic team, expressing confidence that scientific analysis would verify his complete lack of involvement in the incident. Investigators subsequently confirmed his account, noting that no physical or behavioral evidence linked him to the clearing, and he was released from custody without any charges being filed. With the second individual cleared of involvement, detectives focused their efforts on conducting a detailed interview with Angela Sanford. Following her initial assessment at a specialized medical facility designed to support survivors of physical violence, Sanford was brought to the police headquarters for a formal interview shortly after midnight. During the conversation, she appeared highly distraught and initially struggled to provide a coherent sequence of events. However, she eventually revealed a crucial detail that transformed the direction of the inquiry. The meeting in the foothills had not been a random encounter, and she was already acquainted with Joel Leyva. Sanford explained to the case agent that she had met Leyva at a local casino a few days prior to the incident. Being unemployed and searching for potential career opportunities, she had struck up a conversation with Leyva, who had kindly offered to review her credentials if she provided a resume. The two had subsequently exchanged telephone contact information and engaged in several text messaging conversations over the following days. Sanford claimed that she had invited Leyva to accompany her to the secluded mountain trail to participate in a ceremony celebrating a traditional Gaelic holiday known as Beltane, which she associated with her personal practice of alternative beliefs. According to Sanford, her boyfriend had transported her to the trailhead earlier that afternoon, with the understanding that she would be met by Leyva shortly thereafter. She stated that as they walked deeper into the secluded area behind the boulders, the atmosphere became uncomfortable. She alleged that when she stepped away temporarily, Leyva approached her from behind and attempted to restrain her hands using a ceremonial rope she had been wearing around her waist. Sanford claimed that she managed to free herself from the loose restraints, retrieved the ceremonial dagger from her pocket, and delivered several sharp forestrikes to secure her escape before running down the trail to seek assistance. As the detective listened to this detailed account, several elements of the story continued to raise serious doubts. The clinical evaluation conducted by specialized medical personnel revealed no physical markers consistent with a violent struggle or forced restraint. There were no abrasions from the rope, no defensive wounds on her hands, and no significant physical indicators of trauma, with the exception of a few minor scrapes on her knees. Furthermore, when the detective began to press for specific details regarding the transition from a casual walk to a physical confrontation, Sanford became increasingly evasive and defensive, eventually refusing to cooperate further and terminating the interview. To evaluate the credibility of the contrasting claims, investigators sought to develop a comprehensive understanding of Joel Leyva's life, character, and daily routines. Born on June 13th in the year 1957 in Espaola, New Mexico, Leyva had been raised in a deeply religious household as the son of a Christian minister. In the year 1976, he had enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, proudly serving his country for 4 years before returning to his home state. Shortly thereafter, he had met and married his spouse, Betty, with whom he built a stable, loving family that included 2 children and several grandchildren. For nearly 3 decades, Leyva had worked diligently in the field of logistics, managing shipping and receiving operations while earning a reputation as a friendly, outgoing, and exceptionally helpful member of his community. His family members, who were absolutely devastated by the news of his passing, described him as a devoted father and husband who was deeply committed to his faith as a practicing Catholic. They strongly rejected any suggestion that he would participate in alternative rituals or engage in any form of physical misconduct, emphasizing that he had spent his entire life adhering to values of respect, gentleness, and service to others. The stark divergence between Leyva's established character and the allegations made against him led investigators to conduct a thorough review of Sanford's personal history and digital footprint. A background check revealed that in the year 1999, Sanford had filed a similar allegation of physical assault under circumstances that investigators ultimately found difficult to verify due to her subsequent lack of cooperation and failure to attend scheduled interviews, which had led to the closure of that earlier case. To gain further insight, detectives contacted Sanford's boyfriend, who confirmed that he had indeed dropped her off at the Copper Trailhead on the afternoon of the incident. He explained that she had requested that he return to collect her approximately 1 hour later. When he attempted to contact her via mobile phone at the designated time, his calls went unanswered, leading him to believe she had simply deactivated her device. The boyfriend described Sanford as having a strong interest in alternative beliefs and the occult, often spending extended periods alone in wooded areas conducting personal rituals. While he defended her character and expressed belief in her version of events, his testimony confirmed her deep preoccupation with unusual spiritual practices. A detailed examination of Sanford's online activities provided detectives with a chilling perspective on her psychological state. Investigators discovered that she maintained multiple social media profiles under different personas. While one account appeared relatively conventional, another profile was heavily focused on dark themes, displaying imagery associated with alternative spiritualities, historical symbols of malevolence, and a fascination with notorious criminal figures. Her posts frequently discuss themes of power, transformation, and control, suggesting that her interest in alternative beliefs had evolved into a highly customized and troubling obsession that diverged significantly from mainstream spiritual practices. Hoping to clarify the nature of the ritual Sanford claimed to have been celebrating. The lead detective contacted a local representative of the established regional coven. The representative explained that the traditional holiday of Beltane is universally celebrated in the month of May, as it represents the renewal of the earth and the spring season, making its celebration in the month of March highly anomalous. Furthermore, the representative emphasized that mainstream alternative beliefs are strictly peaceful and nature-oriented, possessing absolute prohibitions against any form of harm, violence, or sacrifice, and expressed concern that such practices were being misrepresented to justify a violent act. The definitive breakthrough in the investigation occurred when digital forensic specialists successfully extracted and analyzed the communication logs and contact database from Sanford's mobile phone. The records revealed that Sanford had been the active instigator of the communication with Leva, repeatedly sending messages to encourage him to meet her at the secluded trailhead. The most alarming discovery, however, was located within her phone's contact directory. Investigators found that Leva's mobile number was not saved under his actual name or any variation of it. Instead, Sanford had entered his contact information under the single word sacrifice. This critical piece of digital evidence provided a clear and undeniable motive for the crime, demonstrating to investigators that the entire meeting had been meticulously planned from its inception. The designation of the victim as a sacrifice, combined with the pre-selected, isolated location and the preparation of the ceremonial weapon, indicated that Sanford had lured Leva to the foothills with the deliberate intention of ending his life to fulfill a dark, personal fantasy. The narrative of self-defense was revealed to be a carefully staged fabrication designed to exploit the legal and social protections afforded to actual survivors of violence. Armed with this overwhelming evidence, prosecutors prepared to present a comprehensive case for first-degree murder to a grand jury. However, recognizing the complexities inherent in presenting a case involving alternative beliefs and psychological staging to a jury, and desiring to spare the victim's family the emotional toll of a prolonged trial, the prosecution offered a plea agreement. In December of the year 2011, Angela Sanford entered a plea of guilty to an aggravated charge of second-degree murder, which carried a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal confinement. During the sentencing hearing, numerous members of the Leva family were present in the courtroom to witness the proceedings and honor the memory of their beloved patriarch. Although many family members expressed the belief that a 20-year sentence was insufficient for the profound loss they had suffered, they welcomed the guarantee of a conviction and the knowledge that a dangerous individual had been removed from the community. The court imposed the maximum allowable sentence, bringing a formal end to a deeply troubling case that highlighted the critical importance of objective forensic science, meticulous scene analysis, and the unwavering dedication of law enforcement professionals in pursuing justice for victims of violent crime. In the serene foothills of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the high desert meets the majestic mountain ranges, the transition of seasons brings a sense of renewal and peaceful contemplation. During the late afternoon hours of March 22nd in the year 2010, local residents and outdoor enthusiasts were enjoying the mild spring weather along the Copper Trailhead. This particular location serves as a natural haven for many individuals who seek to escape the daily stresses of work and find solace in the quiet beauty of the desert landscape. However, on this spring afternoon, the peaceful atmosphere was abruptly shattered by a highly unusual and troubling discovery that would soon launch a complex criminal investigation. The sequence of events began a little before 6 o'clock in the evening, when hikers on the trail encountered a woman in a state of extreme distress. She was wearing minimal clothing, consisting only of her undergarments and socks, and appeared to be highly agitated and disoriented. The concerned bystanders immediately recognized the gravity of the situation and assisted the woman, while also contacting the emergency dispatch system by dialing 911. The callers reported that they had encountered a young woman who claimed she had been subjected to a severe personal violation and an unwanted physical advance in the secluded areas of the trail. The prompt actions of these citizens ensured that law enforcement officers and emergency medical personnel were dispatched to the trailhead without delay. Upon arriving at the scene, officers found the woman, who identified herself as 30-year-old Angela Sanford. She was visibly distraught and had visible physical traces of conflict, including marks on her skin and face. She told the initial responding officers that she had been forced to defend herself against an attacker who had attempted to overpower her in the nearby boulders. According to her initial narrative, the individual responsible was still located further up the trail and was unresponsive. While paramedics began to evaluate and provide care to Angela Sanford, officers proceeded cautiously up the trail to locate the other individual and secure the area. A short distance from the trailhead, tucked behind a series of large boulders that effectively obscured the location from the main path, officers made a somber discovery. They found a 52-year-old man, later identified as Joel Leva, in a kneeling position. He was completely unresponsive. An emergency medical technician who arrived shortly thereafter pronounced him deceased at the scene. Next to him, investigators discovered several items that immediately raised questions about the true nature of the encounter, including a length of rope and an ornate fantasy-style dagger vey, kep ite, had distinct cultural markings that appeared to mimic historical Egyptian designs. The presence of such an unusual weapon in a wilderness setting immediately signaled to experienced detectives that they were dealing with a highly unconventional scenario. Initially, the investigation also had to account for reports from bystanders who had observed another individual in the vicinity. Hikers reported seeing a man peering down from the rocky cliffs above the scene, leading to concerns that a second suspect might be involved in the incident. Officers quickly located and detained this individual, who was identified as John Epler. Upon questioning, it became clear that he was simply an outdoor enthusiast who had been hiking off the main trail to challenge himself on a difficult route. He had no connection to either party and had merely paused to observe the sudden gathering of emergency vehicles below. After cooperating fully with the authorities and providing a voluntary biological sample to confirm his lack of involvement, he was cleared of any wrongdoing and released. With the bystander cleared, the focus of the investigation turned entirely to the relationship between Angela Sanford and Joel Leva, and the validity of her claim of self-defense. To seasoned investigators, the physical evidence at the scene did not align with a standard narrative of a sudden, desperate struggle for survival. One of the most glaring inconsistencies was the condition of the woman's clothing. When bystanders had accompanied her back to the location of the encounter to retrieve her belongings, they found her clothes neatly and systematically folded, placed carefully to the side. In a genuine scenario involving a sudden and chaotic physical assault, It is highly improbable that an individual would have the time or the inclination to organize their garments in such a meticulous manner. This small but crucial detail immediately suggested a high degree of deliberation and control rather than panic. Furthermore, the initial physical evaluation of Angela Sanford by specialized forensic medical personnel did not yield the expected evidence of a violent struggle. There were no defensive wounds, severe bruises, or marks consistent with being bound tightly by a rope, despite her claim that the man had attempted to tie her hands. The medical examination showed only minor abrasions on her knees, which did not support her description of a sustained and violent physical conflict. Conversely, the autopsy of Joel Leyva revealed that he had suffered more than a dozen distinct physical injuries inflicted by the sharp dagger. The sheer volume and nature of these wounds suggested a level of focused intent that far exceeded what would typically be associated with a simple act of self-defense. To understand the tragedy, the police had to look deeply into the lives of both individuals. Joel Leyva was a respected resident of Albuquerque, born on June 13th in the year 1957 in Espaola, New Mexico. He was a veteran who had served honorably in the United States Marine Corps for 4 years, starting in the year 1976, before returning to his home state to build a life. He had been married to his wife for nearly 3 decades, and together they had raised 2 children. He was known as a dedicated logistics professional, a devoutly religious man, and exceptionally friendly individual who was always willing to offer a helping hand to anyone in need. His family was devastated by his loss and vehemently rejected the allegations made against his character, emphasizing that he was a gentle and protective family man who lived by strong moral principles. As detectives investigated the connection between the two, they discovered that they had met only a few days prior to the incident at a local establishment. Angela Sanford was unemployed and had engaged in a conversation with Joel Leyva, who had kindly offered to review her professional resume and assist her in finding employment. They exchanged contact information, and over the next few days, they exchanged several messages. Angela Sanford eventually invited Joel Leyva to join her on a hike in the foothills to observe what she described as a seasonal nature celebration. Although she claimed to the police that she was a practitioner of a peaceful, nature-based belief system and wanted to share her faith, the evidence quickly revealed a much darker motivation. The most critical breakthrough in the investigation came from the forensic analysis of Angela Sanford's mobile phone and her digital footprint. When investigators examined her device, they discovered a chilling detail that completely dismantled her claim of self-defense. Rather than saving Joel Leyva's contact details under his actual name, she had programmed his phone number under the designation of sacrifice. This single word, preserved in digital format, provided the prosecution with powerful evidence of premeditation. It suggested that she had not acted out of a sudden fear for her safety, but had instead planned the entire encounter with the explicit intent of causing harm as part of a distorted personal ritual. A review of her social media profiles on popular platforms of that era, such as MySpace, further revealed a deep and troubling preoccupation with dark themes, historical acts of violence, and alternative mythologies. She had maintained multiple online identities where she posted content related to dark forces, historical criminals, and highly individualized interpretations of ancient rituals. Her boyfriend at the time described her as someone who was deeply immersed in these concepts, often retreating into the woods with specialized books and candles to perform personal ceremonies. It became apparent to investigators that her actions were driven by a highly personalized fantasy of power and control rather than any established religious practice. To ensure clarity and avoid any unfair stereotyping of legitimate belief systems, detectives consulted with representatives of the local modern pagan and nature-based communities. These representatives confirmed that traditional seasonal celebrations, such as Beltane, are centered entirely on the appreciation of nature, the changing of seasons, and the renewal of life. They emphasized that human sacrifice or physical harm has absolutely no place in their beliefs and is entirely contrary to their peaceful principles. This distinction was crucial, as it helped the public and the legal system understand that the crime was the result of a single individual's deep psychological issues and personal delusions, rather than a reflection of a wider community. Facing an overwhelming mountain of physical and digital evidence, including the digital records from her phone and the forensic findings from the autopsy, Angela Sanford's legal defense recognized the difficulty of securing an acquittal at trial. In order to guarantee a conviction and avoid the unpredictability of a jury trial, prosecutors offered a plea agreement. In December of the year 2011, she entered a plea of no contest to a charge of second-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. During her sentencing hearing, the court heard moving testimony from the family of Joel Leyva, who spoke of his kindness, his service to his country, and the profound void left by his untimely departure. The presiding judge ultimately sentenced her to the maximum allowable penalty under the agreement, which was 20 years in prison, consisting of 15 years for the primary offense and an additional 5 years due to the aggravating factors of the case. This tragic case offers several profound lessons regarding personal safety, community awareness, and the psychological factors that can lead to such rare but devastating events. It highlights the potential dangers of meeting unfamiliar individuals in isolated or secluded locations, even when the invitation appears to be based on professional assistance or innocent social interactions. For personal protection, it is always advisable to conduct initial meetings in well-populated public spaces and to ensure that family members or trusted friends are fully informed of one's whereabouts and the identity of the person being met. From an investigative standpoint, the resolution of this case underscores the vital importance of logical analysis and digital forensics in modern policing. The detective's ability to identify subtle inconsistencies, such as the neatly folded clothing and the lack of defensive physical marks, allowed them to look past the initial fabricated narrative. Furthermore, the rapid extraction and analysis of mobile phone data proved to be the decisive element in establishing premeditation. For law enforcement agencies, this case demonstrates that maintaining specialized training in digital forensics, understanding online subcultures, and maintaining a meticulous approach to physical evidence are essential tools for ensuring that justice is served swiftly and accurately, ultimately honoring the memory of the victims and bringing closure to their loved ones. The desert landscape of New Mexico is often celebrated for its vast open skies, stunning sandstone formations, and the serene quietude that envelopes its arid expanses. The city of Albuquerque sits like a vibrant oasis within this dramatic terrain, where the modern urban environment meets the timeless majesty of the high desert. For the people who call this region home, the proximity to nature is a source of daily rejuvenation. When the workday concludes, many residents routinely make their way to the foothills of the Sandia Mountains, seeking a temporary escape from their professional responsibilities. The Copper Trailhead, located on the eastern edge of the city, represents one of these highly popular sanctuaries, offering a scenic path where hikers, runners, and nature enthusiasts can find a sense of peace and solitude. On the spring evening of March 22, 2010, the atmosphere was filled with the gentle warmth of the changing season, and multiple visitors were enjoying their customary outdoor routines. However, the tranquility of this beautiful desert setting was suddenly shattered by an unexpected and deeply disturbing encounter that would initiate a complex investigation and ultimately reveal a tragic loss of life. Shortly before 6 o'clock in the evening, a group of hikers walking along the trail came across a sight that immediately raised alarm. They encountered a young woman who was visibly distressed and appearing to be in a state of extreme panic. She was wearing only her undergarments and socks, and there were noticeable traces of blood on her physical person, specifically on her cheek and her right thigh. The witnesses immediately sought to assist her, trying to comprehend the nature of the emergency. The woman, who was later identified as 30-year-old Angela Sanford, claimed that she had just survived a severe physical assault and was fleeing from her attacker. The hikers quickly contacted emergency services, dialing 911 to report the situation. During the telephone call, the caller explained that they had run into a distressed individual in the open space near the trailhead, who reported that she had been subjected to an assault. Because of the urgent nature of the report, the emergency dispatchers immediately sent police officers and paramedics to the scene to secure the area, offer medical assistance, and investigate the alleged crime. Before the arrival of law enforcement, some of the bystanders tried to assist Angela by retrieving her outer clothing from the area where she claimed the incident had occurred. When the police officers arrived at the foothills, they located her further up the trail near a temporary campsite. She repeated her allegations to the responding officers, stating that she had been assaulted and that the individual responsible was still located nearby. While she did not provide extensive details regarding the current state of her alleged attacker, the witnesses who had walked further along the path informed the officers that a male individual was lying unresponsive a short distance away. The priority for the initial responding officers was to ensure Angela was safe and could be treated by the arriving medical personnel. Once her safety was secured, the officers began their search of the immediate area, guided by one of the witnesses who pointed toward the location of the other individual. As the officers moved up the trail, they discovered a male individual lying on the ground in a kneeling position with his clothing partially disarranged. He was completely unresponsive to their presence. Following standard law enforcement safety protocols, the officers secured the individual with handcuffs before rolling him over to assess his condition. It was immediately apparent that he had sustained multiple serious physical injuries to his chest, neck, and face. The paramedics who had been called to the scene examined the individual and officially determined that he had passed away. A search of the deceased man's personal effects revealed a wallet, which allowed investigators to identify him as 52-year-old Joel Leyva, a resident of Albuquerque. The discovery of a deceased individual transformed ve kep hot ate had initially been reported as an emergency response to an assault into a complex homicide investigation. The detectives and the assigned prosecutor were promptly summoned to the foothills to begin their examination of the scene. The preliminary understanding conveyed to the arriving investigative team was that a woman had taken defensive measures against an individual who was attempting to assault her. However, as the detectives conducted their physical walkthrough of the scene, they began to notice several details that did not easily align with a typical scenario of immediate self-defense. The body of Joel Leyva lay on the ground, and in the immediate vicinity, investigators located a length of rope and a highly unusual weapon. The weapon was an ornate, ceremonial-style dagger that featured intricate markings reminiscent of ancient historical designs, looking more like a decorative fantasy item than a practical tool or a typical pocket knife. The presence of such an unusual implement in the quiet desert foothills was the first of many anomalies that would challenge the initial narrative. While the forensic team began documenting the physical evidence, other officers secured the perimeter and began interviewing the witnesses who had remained at the scene. Among these witnesses was Angela, who was waiting to be transported for a comprehensive medical examination. To the experienced eyes of the homicide detectives, the physical layout of the crime scene and the nature of the injuries sustained by the deceased raised significant questions. The physical trauma to Joel Leyva was extensive, exhibiting a level of physical force that appeared to exceed what is typically observed in actions of sudden self-defense. The overall environment did not present the chaotic disarray that usually accompanies a sudden, desperate struggle for survival. Instead, the scene was marked by a bizarre combination of elements that suggested a far more complicated sequence of events than the one initially described. As news of the tragedy reached the family of Joel Leyva, their lives were instantly thrown into a state of profound grief and confusion. His loved ones were contacted by law enforcement in the early hours of the morning, and the sudden loss of a central figure in their family was devastating. Joel was born on June 13, 1957, town of Espanola, New Mexico, and was raised alongside his brothers in a deeply religious and structured household. His family had always prioritized faith and service, with his father serving as a minister and one of his older brothers later attending Bible college. In the year 1976, Joel decided to serve his country by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, where he dedicated 4 years of honorable service. Following his military career, he returned to his home state of New Mexico, where he met and fell in love with a local resident named Betty. The couple married in the early 1980s and built a stable, happy life together over the course of nearly 3 decades. Betty retired from her career with the state of New Mexico, while Joel worked diligently in the field of logistics, managing shipping and receiving operations. Together, they raised 2 children and enjoyed a warm family life filled with laughter, shared activities, and strong community connections. Joel was widely known among his peers, family, and neighbors as an incredibly friendly, generous, and light-hearted person who easily made friends and was always willing to assist anyone in need. His children recalled that while they did not grow up kept hot, abundant material wealth, their father would selflessly offer whatever help he could, including the shirt off his back, to assist a stranger or a friend. By the year 2010, their children had grown, married, and started families of their own, and Joel was enjoying his role as a grandfather. The sudden and violent end to his life was entirely incompatible with the peaceful, faith-filled, and family-oriented life he had led. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, investigators had to rely on the statements provided by the witnesses and the surviving participant, as Joel was no longer able to speak for himself. The initial reports from the hikers indicated that when they first encountered Angela, she was in a state of undress, wearing a blue bikini top, undergarments, and socks, along with a singular long stocking that had holes cut into it to serve as a makeshift glove. She had blood on her cheek and her leg, and she claimed that she had managed to defend herself against an attacker before running away. She suggested that her actions were a sudden, desperate response to an imminent threat. While she appeared too emotionally overwhelmed to provide a detailed narrative at that moment, she was prepared to undergo a specialized medical evaluation designed for survivors of physical trauma. As Angela was being escorted from the area, a witness provided investigators with an additional piece of information that introduced a potential second suspect. The witness described seeing a male individual estimated to be between 30 and 40 years of age, who appeared to be monitoring the crime scene from a higher elevation. The hikers directed the officers to a steep, rocky incline situated above the location where Jola's body was found. Looking up at the large boulders, the officers spotted a man peering down at the police activity. Under the direction of law enforcement, the individual complied with instructions to descend from the rocks. He was placed in handcuffs and transported to the police station for questioning. The man was identified as John Epler, and his unexpected presence at the scene required immediate clarification to determine if he had any involvement in the tragedy. The interrogation of John Epler provided investigators with an opportunity to evaluate his potential connection to the events. John explained that he had no prior acquaintance with either Joel Leyva or Angela Sanford, and had not witnessed any altercation. He explained that after a challenging day at work, he had decided to visit the mountains to engage in a strenuous hike to relieve stress and deplete his physical energy so he could sleep better. Rather than following the established trails, he had chosen to ascend a difficult ravine cutting across the mesa. During his hike, he noticed a young woman situated away from the main paths and felt a passing concern that an isolated area might not be safe for a lone individual. He continued his hike and spent a couple of hours in the upper areas. On his descent, as he looked over a large boulder, he was surprised to see numerous police officers. Fearing that his presence might look suspicious, and admitting to possessing a small amount of personal contraband, he had hesitated before being spotted by an officer. He immediately agreed to provide a DNA sample to demonstrate his complete innocence, and subsequent analysis confirmed that there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene or the individuals involved. He was consequently released without charges, allowing detectives to focus their attention back on Angela. The focus of the investigation returned to the surviving young woman, whose story was beginning to show significant inconsistencies under close analytical scrutiny. While investigators always strive to treat reports of physical trauma with the utmost sensitivity and respect, they must also ensure that all physical evidence supports the claims being made. Angela was taken to a specialized facility where trained forensic nurse examiners conducted a thorough physical evaluation. The purpose of this examination was to document any physical markers of a struggle, such as bruises, abrasions, defensive wounds, or biological evidence. Surprisingly, the medical examination yielded no findings consistent with a violent physical confrontation. There were no defensive marks, no signs of a physical struggle, no rope burns on her wrists despite her claim that her hands had been tied, and no biological evidence supporting her narrative of a sudden assault. The only physical findings were minor, superficial abrasions on her knees, which did not correlate with the severity of the encounter she had described. Furthermore, the physical state of the crime scene itself presented several logical contradictions. When the witnesses had gone to retrieve Angela S. clothing, they noted that her garments were neatly and systematically folded and placed to the side. In a situation involving a sudden, unexpected, and violent physical confrontation, it is highly unusual for a person's clothing to be carefully arranged. Typically, such an event results in scattered items, torn fabric, and general disarray, reflecting a chaotic and desperate struggle. The organized state of her clothing suggested preparation and deliberation rather than an emergency reaction to an immediate threat. Additionally, the weapon itself remained a major point of skepticism. The large, highly ornate ceremonial dagger was a highly impractical item for a casual hike. Yet Angela had brought it, they kept to had her to the foothills. At the police station, detectives conducted a formal interview with Angela in the early hours of the morning. During this conversation, her initial narrative began to shift. She admitted that the encounter was not a random meeting, and that she had prior acquaintance with Joel. She explained that she had met him at a local casino a few days earlier while she was seeking potential employment. Joel, true to his helpful nature, had offered to review her resume and assist her, leading them to exchange contact information and engage in subsequent text communications. Angela then claimed that she had invited Joel to join her in the foothills to participate in a ceremony celebrating a traditional Gaelic seasonal holiday known as Beltane. She stated that she hoped to introduce him to her beliefs, which she described as aligned with Wiccan practices. According to her updated statement, they had walked into an isolated area behind some large boulders, away from the main trail, where they had consumed beverages. She claimed that when she stepped away, Joel made unwanted physical advances and attempted to bind her hands using a ceremonial rope she wore around her waist. She asserted that she managed to free herself, retrieve the ceremonial dagger she had brought, and stab him 3 or 4 times in self-defense before fleeing the scene. However, this explanation did not reconcile with the objective findings of the autopsy. The medical examiner's report revealed that Joel Leyva had sustained over 20 traumatic physical injuries, far exceeding the 3 or 4 defensive contacts Angela claimed to have made. The sheer quantity and distribution of the wounds indicated a highly focused, sustained, and deliberate action that was entirely inconsistent with a sudden, defensive reaction. The discrepancy between her claims and the physical evidence became even more pronounced as detectives investigated her background and digital presence. They discovered that Angela had a history of making a similar allegation of assault in the year 1999, a case that she ultimately did not pursue, failing to attend scheduled follow-up interviews with investigators. To understand her current lifestyle and associations, detectives interviewed her boyfriend, who had dropped her off at the trailhead on the afternoon of the incident. He confirmed that she had asked him to return in approximately 1 hour, but when he attempted to contact her, she did not answer. Crucially, the boyfriend disputed her identity as an established practitioner of traditional Wiccan beliefs, describing her, instead, as someone who was merely fascinated by the superficial aspects of alternative spiritualities. An analysis of Angela's online footprint revealed a deeply troubled psychological profile. She maintained 2 distinct social media accounts under different personas. One of these accounts, active on a popular platform of that era, was filled ve kepite, hot dark, non-traditional imagery, including pentagrams and references to non-traditional, dark spiritual practices. Her posts frequently centered on themes of dark entities, vampires, and an unusual fascination with historical serial killers and the notoriety they achieved. This online persona suggested that she was highly consumed by a personalized, dark fantasy world where she sought a sense of power and control that she felt she lacked in her personal life. Investigators also consulted with local representatives of the traditional Wiccan community to understand the nature of the holiday she claimed to be celebrating. The representatives explained that the traditional seasonal festival of Beltane is a peaceful celebration of nature, life, and the renewal of the earth, which is traditionally observed in the month of May, not in the month of March. They emphasized that their peaceful, nature-based practices strictly prohibit any form of harm or violence toward others, completely distancing their community from the tragic events that had transpired in the foothills. The most critical and definitive piece of evidence was uncovered when digital forensics experts analyzed the mobile telephone records of both the suspect and the victim. The records clearly demonstrated that Angela had been the active initiator of the communication, reaching out to Joel and inviting him to meet her at the trail under the pretense of a friendly gathering. The discovery that settled any remaining doubts regarding her intent was found within her telephone's contact list. Investigators discovered that she had saved Joel's contact information not under his actual name, but under the singular, chilling label of sacrifice. This revelation changed the entire understanding of the case, indicating that the meeting was not a casual outing or a spontaneous spiritual gathering, but a calculated, pre-planned action designed to fulfill a dark, personal delusion. The realization that Joel Leyva had been deliberately targeted and lured to an isolated location under the guise of friendship was a profound shock to his family and the community. The evidence compiled by the Albuquerque Police Department painted a clear picture of a premeditated crime driven by dark obsessions and a desire for personal notoriety. On March 24, 2010, just 2 days after the discovery in the foothills, Angela Sanford was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The strength of the physical evidence, combined with the digital forensics and the clear documentation of premeditation, provided the prosecution with a robust case to present to a grand jury. Despite the compelling nature of the evidence, legal proceedings always carry inherent uncertainties, and prosecutors must carefully weigh the potential outcomes of a trial. The defense team argued that Angela's perception of reality was significantly impaired and that her complex personal history had affected her psychological state. There was a concern that if the case went to a full trial, a jury might struggle to comprehend the bizarre motivations behind the crime, or that a skilled defense might create enough doubt to result in a lesser verdict. To ensure a guaranteed conviction and prevent the possibility of a hung jury, the prosecution, with the agreement of the Leyva family, offered a plea agreement. Angela agreed to plead guilty to an aggravated charge of second-degree murder, which carried a substantial, guaranteed prison sentence. In December 2011, the legal process reached its conclusion as Angela appeared in court for her sentencing hearing. Members of the Leyva family attended the proceeding, seeking a sense of closure and justice for their beloved father, husband, and brother. During the hearing, the defense attempted to secure a reduced sentence, pointing to her psychological detachment and her inability to distinguish between her internal fantasies and physical reality. However, no external witnesses stepped forward to speak on her behalf, and the judge ultimately imposed the maximum sentence permissible under the plea agreement, sentencing her to 20 years in state prison. This sentence consisted of 15 years for the charge of second-degree murder, with an additional 5 years added due to aggravating factors identified in the commission of the crime. Analyzing this tragic case offers profound insights into the psychological motivations of individuals who commit et-u-sehat actions and highlights the critical steps necessary to prevent similar occurrences. The primary motive in this instance was not rooted in any traditional, recognized spiritual practice, but rather in a deeply personal, pathological obsession with power, control, and the desire to manifest a dark fantasy in the physical world. For individuals experiencing severe personal dysfunction or feelings of helplessness, adopting a dark, alternative persona can sometimes serve as a maladaptive coping mechanism. This psychological construct allows them to feel a sense of superiority and control over others, which can tragically escalate into violence if their delusions are left unaddressed by mental health professionals or community support systems. The frequency with which such unusual cases occur often correlates with the modern rise of digital spaces where individuals can find validation for highly isolated, extreme, or eccentric beliefs. While the Internet offers immense opportunities for positive connection, it can also create insular environments where unhealthy fixations are amplified without the balancing influence of everyday social interactions. To prevent such tragedies, it is vital for families, friends, and community members to remain attentive to the mental well-being of those around them. When an individual begins to show an intense, obsessive interest in themes of violence, isolation, or harmful ideologies, early intervention through professional counseling, mental health resources, and supportive dialogue can help redirect them toward a healthier, more constructive path. For ordinary citizens, this case serves as an important reminder of the necessity of personal safety and vigilance, even when acting out of genuine kindness and a desire to help others. Joel Leva's tragic vulnerability was his innate generosity and his willingness to assist a person who claimed to be seeking employment and guidance. While compassion is a cornerstone of a healthy community, it is essential to exercise caution when interacting with new acquaintances, particularly when invited to isolated or unfamiliar locations. When meeting someone for the first time or engaging in a professional or casual discussion, individuals should always prioritize well-populated, public settings such as cafes, restaurants, or community centers. Furthermore, it is a crucial safety practice to inform trusted family members or friends of one's exact destination, the identity of the person they are meeting, and the expected duration of the outing, ensuring that someone is always aware of their whereabouts. From an investigative standpoint, the rapid and successful resolution of this case highlights several best practices that law enforcement agencies can utilize to solve complex crimes more efficiently. The most important detail that the police relied on was the objective evaluation of the physical crime scene, which immediately exposed the logical contradictions in the suspect's initial self-defense claim, the neat arrangement of the clothing, the highly unusual nature of the weapon, and the medical examiner's findings regarding the quantity of the injuries were crucial in redirecting the focus of the investigation. This underscores the necessity of maintaining an objective, evidence-based approach from the very beginning of any report, ensuring that the physical reality of the scene always takes precedence over verbal statements. Additionally, the utilization of digital forensics was the key factor that completely dismantled the perpetrator's fabricated narrative. The retrieval of mobile phone records and the discovery of the specific contact label provided undeniable proof of premeditation and intent, turning a highly complex and bizarre defense into a clear-cut case of planned violence. Modern law enforcement can accelerate their investigations by prioritizing the immediate preservation and analysis of digital evidence, including social media activity, text communications, and geolocational data, which often contain the most accurate and unvarnished records of a suspect's plans and associations. By combining rigorous physical evidence collection with advanced digital analysis and compassionate, victim-centered policing, justice can be served swiftly, protecting the community and honoring the memory of those whose lives were unjustly cut short. The serene beauty of the high desert in New Mexico has long served as a source of peace, inspiration, and quiet contemplation for Bayotay hot residents and visitors. The city of Albuquerque is nestled against the majestic backdrop of the Sandia Mountains, a landscape defined by dramatic rocky foothills, pinyon pines, and vast open skies. For many who live in this unique desert oasis, the daily routine involves escaping the hustle of modern life by heading to the foothills as the sun begins its descent. On any given late afternoon, popular paths such as the Copper Trailhead are filled with individuals seeking exercise, solitude, and a connection with nature. This was precisely the setting on March 22, 2010. A pleasant spring afternoon where the air was warming and the desert was beginning to wake from its winter slumber. Yet, shortly before 6 in the evening, the peaceful atmosphere of this cherished natural escape was abruptly shattered by a highly unusual and deeply concerning discovery that would soon expose a dark and tragic narrative. A group of hikers enjoying the trails near the Copper Trailhead was suddenly confronted with a scene that felt entirely out of place in this tranquil environment. Emerging from the brush was a young woman who appeared to be in a state of extreme distress and physical disorientation. She was wearing only her undergarments and a pair of socks with some minor scratches and marks visible on her skin. The hikers immediately realized that she was in a state of panic, displaying signs of severe emotional shock. When they approached her to offer assistance, she claimed that she had just survived a horrific physical assault and that her attacker was still in the immediate vicinity. In an effort to help her, some of the bystanders recovered her discarded clothing from the surrounding brush, while others quickly contacted the emergency services, placing a call to 911. Upon receiving the urgent report of a woman in distress in the open space near the foothills, the Albuquerque Police Department immediately dispatched patrol officers and medical personnel to the trailhead. When the first officers arrived at the scene, they found the young woman being attended to by the concerned citizens who had found her. She identified herself as 30-year-old Angela Sanford. Despite her visible agitation, she was able to convey to the officers that she had been subjected to a sudden assault near a makeshift campsite further up the trail. She indicated that in her effort to defend herself, she had managed to strike her assailant and escape, leaving him unresponsive near the site of the encounter. She did not provide extensive details about the exact condition of the individual, but she made it clear that he was no longer a threat. While medical personnel began evaluating Angela Sanford to ensure her physical well-being, police officers proceeded up the rugged mountain path to locate the other individual and secure the area. Guided by the directions provided by the hikers, the officers navigated the rocky terrain and soon discovered a male figure positioned near a grouping of large boulders. The man was found in a resting, kneeling posture, partially slumped forward. He was completely unresponsive to the officers' calls. Following standard safety protocols, the officers secured the individual with hand restraints before rolling him over to assess his condition and administer first aid. It was at this moment that they discovered the man had sustained multiple severe physical injuries to his upper torso and neck area. Paramedics were quickly called to the location, but they were unable to revive him and officially pronounced him deceased at the scene. Through identification documents found in his possession, the deceased man was identified as 52-year-old Joel Leva, a respected resident of the Albuquerque area. The discovery of a deceased individual transformed the rescue operation into a highly complex investigation, prompting the dispatch of homicide detectives and representatives from the district attorney's office. As the sun dipped below the horizon, investigators began a meticulous walkthrough of the crime scene, which was located in an isolated pocket of the foothills, obscured from the main trail by large geologic formations. The physical evidence present at the site immediately began to raise questions in the minds of the seasoned investigators. On the ground near the body of Joel Leva lay a length of rope and an unusual, highly decorative weapon. Rather than a common pocket knife or utility tool that a hiker might carry for safety, the weapon was a heavy, specialized dagger featuring intricate designs and symbols that resembled ancient Egyptian motifs. It appeared to be a piece of fantasy memorabilia or a ceremonial object rather than a practical tool, which seemed highly anomalous for a casual hike in the desert. As detectives began interviewing the witnesses who remained at the trailhead, a surprising new detail emerged that introduced a potential secondary threat. The hikers who had assisted Angela Sanford reported that while they were helping her, they noticed a man positioned on a steep rocky incline high above the crime scene. According to their accounts, this individual was peering down over the boulders, watching the unfolding events with an intense and suspicious focus. Believing that this could be an accomplice or a secondary suspect involved in the incident, officers immediately turned their attention to the high rocks. An officer drew her duty weapon, aimed it toward the rocky ledge, and ordered the individual to show his hands and descend from the slope. The man complied without resistance, and he was quickly detained and transported to the police station for detailed questioning. The detained individual was identified as John Epler, a local resident who was findable in the high rocky area near the scene. During his interrogation, detectives worked diligently to determine if he had any connection to the tragedy or if he had acted in concert with either of the parties involved. John Epler explained that he had absolutely no knowledge of Joel Leva or Angela Sanford. He recounted that he had experienced a highly stressful and exhausting day at his workplace and had decided to visit the mountains to engage in a strenuous off-trail hike to channel his frustration and fatigue. He explained that he preferred climbing the steep, difficult ravines rather than walking the established paths. While cutting across the mesa, he had spotted a female figure in the distance who seemed vulnerable, which briefly caught his attention. But he chose to keep his distance to avoid causing her any unnecessary alarm. John Epler further explained that on his descent down the mountain hours later, He had emerged onto a flat, rocky ledge and looked down, only to see a large number of police officers securing the trail. In a moment of sudden panic, he realized that his presence in such close proximity to a major police operation might make him look suspicious, despite his complete innocence. He admitted to the detectives that his initial anxiety was compounded by the fact that he was carrying a small, unauthorized pipe in his pocket, which he feared would lead to his arrest. Demonstrating a high level of cooperation, he immediately consented to provide a biological sample for comparison, asserting that forensic science would easily verify his absolute lack of involvement in any physical altercation. Subsequent investigations, timeline verifications, and forensic evaluations fully supported his account, confirming that he was simply an unfortunate bystander who had chosen an incredibly poorly timed route for his evening exercise. He was subsequently released without any charges. With John Epler cleared of any involvement, the focus of the investigation returned to the narrative provided by Angela Sanford. Detectives recognized that individuals who survive severe personal trauma often struggle to recall details clearly in the immediate aftermath of an event. It is a well-documented phenomenon in victim advocacy and forensic psychology that the shock of a sudden threat can cause memory fragmentation, emotional volatility, and temporary confusion. However, as the detectives began to compare her initial statements with the physical evidence gathered from the mountain trail and the medical evaluations, significant inconsistencies began to emerge that could not be attributed to trauma-induced memory lapses. One of the first physical clues that troubled the investigating officers was the condition of the scene where the struggle supposedly occurred. Witnesses who had accompanied Angela Sanford back to the site to retrieve her belongings noted that her discarded clothing was not scattered in a manner consistent with a sudden, chaotic struggle. Instead, her garments had been neatly and precisely folded and set aside on a rock. In a genuine scenario involving a sudden and terrifying assault, the natural human response is defined by panic, chaotic movement, and an immediate flight to safety. The idea that a victim would take the time to carefully fold and organize her clothes before or during such a crisis ran entirely contrary to established patterns of human behavior in emergency situations. This small but vital detail suggested a high degree of control and preparation rather than a spontaneous defensive reaction. To gain a clearer understanding of the physical dynamics of the encounter, investigators relied heavily on the findings of the sexual assault nurse examiners who conducted a thorough medical evaluation of Angela Sanford. These specialized professionals are trained to identify and document even the smallest physical indicators of a physical struggle, such as defensive marks, abrasions, bruising, or evidence of restraint. The results of the examination were highly revealing. The medical staff found absolutely no physical evidence consistent with a violent physical struggle. There were no marks indicating that her hands had been bound with the rope found at the scene, no defensive injuries on her arms or hands, and no forensic trace evidence suggesting a physical assault had taken place. The only physical markings identified on her body were minor, superficial abrasions on her knees, which did not support her account of a desperate struggle for survival. The most definitive contradiction to her story came from the findings of the post-mortem examination conducted on the body of Joel Leva. Angela Sanford had claimed that she managed to secure the decorative dagger and struck the victim approximately 3 or 4 times in a frantic effort to free herself before fleeing the scene. However, The medical examiner documented that Joel Leyva had sustained at least 13 distinct physical injuries, with some records indicating over 20 separate wounds concentrated on his upper body, head, and neck. In the field of forensic science and criminology, such an extensive number of wounds is recognized as an indicator of an intentional, highly focused, and prolonged attack rather than a brief, defensive reaction aimed purely at escaping a threat. The physical evidence clearly indicated that the individual who inflicted these wounds did so with a level of persistence that completely undermined any claims of a quick self-defense action. As the physical evidence began to dismantle the suspect's version of events, detectives turned their attention to understanding the background of the deceased man to determine if there was any plausible basis for the allegations. They found a family that was completely devastated by the loss of a beloved patriarch and utterly shocked by the nature of the accusations. Joel Leyva had lived a life characterized by service, devotion, and kindness. Born in the year 1957, he grew up in a deeply religious home as the son of a minister. He served honorably in the United States Marine Corps for 4 years, demonstrating a commitment to duty and discipline. Following his military service, he settled in New Mexico, married his wife, Betty, and dedicated the next 30 years to raising his children and working in logistics and shipping. Those who knew Joel Leyva described him as an exceptionally friendly, open, and helpful individual who would go out of his way to assist anyone in need. He was a devout member of his local Shehat Ura Shehat community and was deeply committed to his faith. His family and friends emphasized that he was a man of peace who lived by the principle of never raising a hand in violence against anyone. The suggestion that he would hike into the mountains to engage in a violent physical assault was entirely inconsistent with his character, his beliefs, and his lifelong behavior. This stark contrast between the suspect's allegations and the reality of Joel Leyva's life drove investigators to dig deeper into the actual nature of their connection and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon in the foothills. Through a comprehensive review of telephone records and interviews, detectives reconstructed the timeline of the relationship between Angela Sanford and Joel Leyva. The investigation revealed that their acquaintance was extremely brief, having commenced only a few days prior to the incident. They had met by chance at a local casino, where the suspect was spending time and the victim was visiting. Angela Sanford, who was unemployed and experiencing financial difficulties, mentioned her search for employment. Joel Leyva, true to his helpful nature, offered to assist her by reviewing her resume and suggesting potential job opportunities. They exchanged contact information with the understanding that they would stay in touch regarding these prospects. However, the phone records painted a highly concerning picture of what transpired next. Rather than the victim pursuing the suspect, it was Angela Sanford who initiated multiple communications, actively calling and sending text messages to Joel Leyva. She proposed that they meet in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains on the afternoon of March 22, 2010. Her stated pretense for the meeting was an invitation to join her in celebrating an ancient pagan seasonal holiday known as Beltane. She claimed to investigators that she hoped to introduce him to her spiritual path and potentially interest him in her beliefs. Joel Leyva, likely viewing the invitation as a harmless opportunity to support an acquaintance and enjoy a walk in the beautiful New Mexico foothills, agreed to meet her at the trailhead. The breakthrough that solidified the premeditated nature of the crime came from a forensic analysis of Angela Sanford's mobile phone. When detectives accessed her contact list to find the victim's information, they made a discovery that sent a chill through the entire investigative team. She had not saved Joel Leiva's contact information under his name, nor had she used a neutral label. Instead, his phone number was saved in her device under the single explicit word, sacrifice. This digital detail was a monumentally significant piece of evidence. It demonstrated vikepwite, hot, absolute clarity, that before they had even met at the trailhead, and long before any alleged altercation had occurred, the suspect had already designated this helpful, trusting family man for a dark and violent purpose. The claim of a sudden, spontaneous act of self-defense was completely demolished by her own digital record. To understand the psychological factors driving this tragic event, investigators looked closely at Angela Sanford's personal history and her online activity. They discovered a young woman who had experienced a highly unstable and dysfunctional upbringing, which left her with deep feelings of resentment and a perceived lack of control over her own life. As a coping mechanism, she had developed a profound and obsessive interest in alternative belief systems, the occult and dark fantasy concepts. She maintained multiple social media profiles, some of which were filled vacapte, hat imagery associated with dark practices, unconventional lifestyles, and a fascination with notorious historical criminals and violence. Her online posts often featured references to alternative realities, showing a troubling pattern of a person who was increasingly retreating into a dark fantasy world of her own creation. For Angela Sanford, these concepts did not appear to be merely a passive interest. Instead, she had allowed these obsessions to consume her thoughts, gradually blurring the boundary between imagination and reality. The investigation suggested that she viewed the upcoming seasonal holiday as a significant event and had constructed a highly personalized, dark ritual in her mind that required a physical subject. Her selection of Joel Leiva, a gentle and helpful man who had shown her simple human kindness, was the result of a calculated effort to exploit his trusting nature for her own psychological fantasy. In an effort to understand the specific claims she made regarding the spiritual holiday, detectives reached out to representatives of the local Wiccan and pagan communities in Albuquerque. The response from these groups was immediate and definitive. Spiritual leaders explained that genuine practices associated with these traditions are deeply rooted in a respect for nature, peace, and the preservation of life. They emphasized that there is absolutely no tradition of harm or physical sacrifice within their belief systems, and any such suggestion is a complete distortion of their values. Furthermore, they pointed out a glaring error in the suspect's narrative. The holiday she claimed to be celebrating, Beltane, is a traditional spring festival that occurs at the beginning of the month of May, not in the month of March when the incident took place. This logical error highlighted the shallow and highly fabricated nature of her knowledge, showing that she had merely adopted terminology from her reading to construct a convenient pretense for her actions. With the evidence of premeditation fully established, police officers arrested Angela Sanford on March 24, 2010, charging her with first-degree murder. The arrest brought a sense of relief to the community, but it was only the beginning of a complex legal process. The prosecution faced the challenge of preparing for a trial where a jury would be presented with a highly unusual and potentially sensationalized narrative. Even when the physical evidence is clear, trials involving claims of self-defense and personal trauma can be unpredictable, as defense attorneys often seek to appeal to the emotions of the jurors, to avoid the risk of a prolonged trial that could further distress the victim's family, and to ensure a guaranteed conviction. The prosecution ultimately engaged in discussions regarding a plea agreement. In December of the year 2011, Angela Sanford appeared in court for her sentencing hearing. She agreed to enter a plea of no contest to an aggravated charge of second-degree murder. Under the terms of the agreement, the judge sentenced her to the maximum allowable penalty under the circumstances, which was a total of 20 years in prison. This sentence comprised 15 years for the primary charge of second-degree murder, with an additional 5 years added due to the presence of significant aggravating factors. During the emotional hearing, members of Joel Leiva's family stood before the court to express the profound impact of the loss, honoring the memory of a husband, father, and brother who had been taken from them in such a senseless manner. While they expressed that no amount of time in prison could ever truly equal the value of the life that was lost, they acknowledged that the conviction provided a necessary measure of justice and ensured that the individual responsible would be held accountable under the law. Analyzing this tragic case reveals several profound insights into the psychology of modern crimes and the methods employed by law enforcement to ensure that justice is served. One of the most significant aspects to consider is the nature of the criminal's motive. In many traditional cases, violence is driven by tangible factors such as material gain, personal disputes, or sudden anger. In this instance, however, the motive was rooted in a deep-seated psychological displacement. The suspect, feeling powerless and isolated in her personal life, sought to establish a sense of control and significance by adopting an extreme, dark persona. When an individual becomes isolated and immerses themselves in dark, unchecked fantasies, the psychological safeguards that govern social behavior can erode. The tragedy occurs when these fantasies transition from internal thoughts to outward actions, resulting in the targeting of an innocent individual who represents the very qualities of stability, kindness, and community that the perpetrator lacks. This case also illustrates the critical role that objective physical and digital evidence plays in dismantling fabricated narratives. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, the suspect attempted to position herself as a victim, relying on societal empathy and the remote location of the event to protect her from scrutiny. However, the sophistication of modern forensic science and the meticulous nature of police work quickly exposed the flaws in her story. The most significant clues were not complex forensic mysteries, but rather simple, logical contradictions that did not fit the claimed scenario. The first crucial clue was the state of the physical scene, specifically the neatly folded clothing. This detail highlights the mild irony that often accompanies criminal planning. In her effort to present a controlled and perhaps structured setting for her kept no purposes, the suspect created an environment that was far too orderly to support a claim of a sudden, chaotic struggle. A genuine struggle is characterized by disorder, physical displacement, and spontaneity. The neatness of the scene was a silent but powerful witness that alerted detectives to the likelihood of premeditation. This underscores a valuable lesson for investigators, namely that the absence of expected chaos can often be as revealing as the presence of evidence itself. The second vital component was the digital evidence recovered from the suspect's mobile phone. In the modern era, our digital devices serve as a detailed reflection of our thoughts, plans, and associations. The discovery of the victim's contact details stored under a highly specific, ominous label was a definitive piece of evidence that could not be explained away as a product of memory lapse or emotional distress. It provided an undeniable link between her internal thoughts and her physical actions, proving that the meeting was not a casual social gathering, but a planned confrontation. For law enforcement, this reinforces the absolute necessity of securing and analyzing digital footprints as early as possible in an investigation, as these records frequently contain the true key to establishing intent and premeditation. Another key factor was the utilization of external expertise to evaluate the claims made by the suspect. By reaching out to the local spiritual community, detectives were able to quickly determine that her claims regarding the seasonal holiday were culturally inaccurate and fundamentally flawed. This step not only prevented the unfair stigmatization of a peaceful community, but it also stripped the suspect of her constructed pretense, exposing her actions as a personal, highly distorted anomaly. For law enforcement, maintaining open communication with diverse community groups is an invaluable resource that can provide rapid clarity when dealing with unusual or specialized claims. Drawing life lessons from this tragedy is essential for promoting personal safety and community vigilance. One of the most important lessons is the need for caution when establishing new relationships, particularly when transitioning from a public space to an isolated or remote environment. Joel Leiva's tragic vulnerability was his own goodness. His desire to help a fellow human being find employment led him to overlook the potential risks of meeting an acquaintance in a secluded location. While maintaining empathy and a helpful spirit is vital for a healthy society, it is equally important to practice personal safety boundaries. When meeting someone who is not well known, it is highly recommended to keep initial interactions in well-populated public environments. If a meeting must take place in a natural area or trail, individuals should always ensure they are accompanied by friends or family, or, at the very least, inform trusted contacts of their exact location, the identity of the person they are meeting, and their expected return time. This simple practice of sharing plans can create a vital safety net that deters bad actors and ensures a rapid response if an emergency arises. For communities, this case serves as a reminder of the importance of recognizing signs of severe isolation and psychological detachment in individuals. While eccentric interests or alternative lifestyles are a normal part of human diversity, a profound retreat into dark, violent themes, coupled with a growing hostility toward reality, can be a warning sign of deeper issues. Offering support, encouraging connection, reality, and when necessary, seeking professional guidance for individuals who seem to be losing touch. Healthy social boundaries can prevent the escalation of personal distress into harmful actions. The resolution of this case stands as a testament to the dedication, intelligence, and humanity of the law enforcement officers and legal professionals who worked to uncover the truth. Faced with a bizarre and initially confusing scenario, they did not settle for simple answers or allow a fabricated claim to stand. Instead, they relied on logical analysis, forensic precision, and a deep respect for the memory of the victim to piece together the true story. Their efforts ensured that a dangerous individual was removed from the community, providing a measure of peace to a grieving family, and reinforcing the triumph of justice and truth over darkness and deception. Through their work, the memory of Joel Leiva is honored as a man of peace, service, and kindness, whose legacy continues to be cherished by those who loved him.